Most recently, before I moved to Ohio, I was living out in the country in western New York. While I had been living there, I had accumulated about 20 old tires. Whenever we'd get tires replaced, I would keep them, planning on doing something with them eventually. Well, I never got around to doing that. And when I sold my property in western New York, I just left the tires there. I figured, maybe the next owner could come up with a use for them. Well, I got a call from the new owner about a week after I moved saying, "Hey, you left all of your tires here in the shed. Can you come deal with them, please?" I'm like, "Oh, no, don't worry. I left them there intentionally. You can keep them." And the lady who bought the property said, "Yeah, no, please come and get rid of these." So I said, okay, but now I've got another problem because I was driving a little Honda Civic Hybrid at the time and I had no way of shifting 20 tires without taking multiple trips. So I called up a buddy of mine. He drove a little Ford Fiesta, and between the two of us, we managed to get all of the tires into these two little cars. But I had a plan. We drove to this ravine nearby and we dumped the tires into a ravine. Now, before you're like, "Hey, Paul, you're an asshole," yeah, maybe. But also, this was kind of the known place where people did this. There were already maybe 1 or 2 thousand tires in this ravine when me and my buddy rolled all of the tires down the hill into it, so I didn't feel too bad about it. But anyway, the point of this somewhat embarrassing story is we're going to do an exercise now based on it. Suppose the market for tyres is characterised by negative externalities of consumption because there's some idiots who will just inappropriately dispose of their tyres. So we're going to show negative externalities of consumption on this graph and then figure out the right size for a corrective tax in this market. Now, before you start, I want you guys to start to do this in a particular way. Particularly, we're going to have a non-parallel shift of this demand curve. So what's going on here? We've got our negative externalities, right? And they're negative externalities of consumption. So that's going to mean that we're doing it on the demand side here. We're showing the marginal social benefit as being different from the marginal private benefit. And they're negative, so we're going to say that the true benefit is lower than the marginal private benefit. But I'm going to ask you to do a non-parallel shift here, something that looks like this. My thought here is that those first few tires in the ravine are the ones that have the greatest cost to society, and the later ones aren't nearly so bad, because if there's already 1,000 tires in the ravine, 1,020 is not much worse than 1,000, but 20 is a lot worse than 0 up here. Okay, so go ahead and draw that marginal social benefit curve as a non-parallel shift like that, and then think about how we could implement a tax to deal with these externalities. So I'll give you a couple of seconds to think about that. Pause the video if you'd like, and then come back. Okay, so how do we choose the right size here? Well, the key is to notice, and I'll get rid of all of my other stuff that I drew on here, the key is to notice that we know what the right quantity is, right? We know that the right quantity is where the true cost to society and the true benefit to society of these tires just meet. And so they just meet right here, so that is our ideal quantity for these tires. Okay, so now our next question is, how do we apply a tax that's going to move the quantity from here, our market quantity, back to here? So we're going to apply a tax that shifts the supply curve up, but how far? Well, think about what happens if we stick in, don't draw this, a supply curve that looks like that. So a new curve with tax, a new supply curve with tax that looks like this. This is supply prime with tax. What's happened to the equilibrium with tax? Well, it's sort of shifted along here, right, to this point. We've gone about halfway. We've shifted the quantity about halfway back. So what we need to do is keep on pushing that supply curve up until It just touches the demand curve there. So that is the exact size of the optimal tax. That's the one that we need. And so as we do that, that's going to shift our supply curve up like so. There is our supply curve with the optimally sized tax on it. And so what I really want to point out here is that depending on how big is this externality, that's going to change the tax, right? But also, depending on the position of the supply curve, we could end up with a larger or a smaller tax, depending on where exactly our optimal quantity was going to end up. So we've got a couple of lessons here for how big that optimally sized tax is. One, we need it to be equal to the size of the negative externality. We knew that part already. It's the second part that we learned from this graph, which is we need to match the size of the externality at the socially optimal level of output. Because if we look here, the size of the externality varies all the way along here. It's relatively small down here, relatively big up here. Here at the socially optimal level, this thing that I've marked as optimal tax is the exact distance between the marginal social benefit curve and the marginal private benefit curve. Then that must be the amount of the externality at the socially optimal level of output. So that then needs to be the size of the tax that we apply.